This is our special Ask DW. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, folks, we're having a technical problem here. Maybe if I can ask my producer if they could correct it in the regie for me. Yeah, just bear with us, folks, for 1 second. Okay, welcome to our special Ask DW. It's your chance to have your questions answered by our correspondents. Tonight, massive blow for Merz. What's next? Friedrich Merz is Germany's new chancellor, but the vote did not go as smoothly as expected. More on that coming up, but first, here's the moment when Merz was finally elected in the German parliament to be the next German chancellor.
Member of Parliament Friedrich Merz has received the required majority of at least 316 votes. He has been elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany in accordance with Article 63(2) of the Basic Law. I ask you, Mr. Merz, do you accept this election?
Madam President, I thank you for the confidence and I accept this election.
Well, with me here in the studio now is DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Hase. She has been watching events at the Bundestag for us today. It's good to have you here, Nina. And the day's drama was also closely observed across Europe. Our Brussels correspondent, Rosie Burchard, she has plenty of details for us as well. Rosie, it's good to see you. But first, we want to take a closer look now at what was a truly unprecedented day in German politics. The first time in the post-war period that a designated chancellor did not get the required majority in the first round of voting.
So wahr mir Gott helfe.
This was the moment he'd been waiting for, but the day got off to a rocky start. The Member of Parliament Friedrich Merz has not received the required majority of at least 316 votes. In accordance with Article 63, paragraph 2 of the Constitution, he has not been elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. Shockwaves from Berlin felt all the way in Frankfurt, as the stock market reacted to the news and ripple effects were felt beyond Germany. When Merz's party won the election, he promised stability, increased spending, both domestically and on defence. He said the world wouldn't wait for Germany to step up. And in the second vote, 325 votes in favour, a majority, followed by a trip to see Germany's president, making Friedrich Merz, on a day that started with an unexpected defeat, Germany's 10th Chancellor since the Second World War.
All right, we want you to send us your questions and your comments. We want to hear from you. Let's dive into the conversation now. Let's go over to Nina. Nina, it took 2 rounds to make Friedrich Merz the new chancellor. Did Germany just elect itself, or the lawmakers elect themselves, a lame duck chancellor?
Lame duck is too strong a word, really it is. But of course today was a historic day. Never before in post-war German history has it taken a new chancellor 2 rounds to get elected. Everybody else was elected in the first round. And that is, of course, because of our system, our political system. We don't elect the candidates, unlike in other countries. So we elect the parties. They then elect the people who go into Bundestag. And these people then choose a candidate who is going to be elected by the people of the coalition parties who are represented in Bundestag. And today, what was special was that not all people from Friedrich Merz's own ranks voted in favour of him. So this is something where he really has to work hard now.
Do we know who didn't vote for him?
No, and it will take weeks, months, maybe years to find out, because it was a secret ballot.
Right.
Yeah, it was a secret ballot. And that is something where, of course, the blame gaming started straight away in Bundestag. There was a lot of finger pointing behind the scenes. People were accusing each other of lying. And so that is something where, especially these two men, the new Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor, Lars Klingbeil, so from the Social Democrats, they will have to talk to their own people. I mean, lots of people from the Conservatives and the CDU were essentially unhappy that yet again another coalition between those parties. It's not a marriage of love, right? But it is something where Lars Klingbeil and Friedrich Merz will have to talk to them and say, OK, enough of protest votes now. We need to show stability.
Were you surprised that this happened today? Did you see this coming?
No. No, frankly, and nobody else did, including the politicians, Brent, and that was striking, because after that first round, it took a couple of hours for Bundestag procedures to be clear. I mean, you know, we were never in a constitutional crisis, and I think that is also important to remind people, because, you know, we did see a couple of headlines saying, well, you know, Germany is in a crisis mode now and No. The Constitution has clear rules, but it took the politicians a while to find these rules in the basic law and then act accordingly. But they did. But it was a sign for me and for everybody else observing this that they really hadn't prepared for this moment.
Let me ask you, Rosie, how did today's events look from where you are in Brussels?
Well, I can say there was a sense of a real gasp, a sharp intake of breath here this morning when that news broke that Friedrich Merz had not cleared that first hurdle. I spoke to some sources who said it just really looked like a mess. And we had some members of the European Parliament standing up in Strasbourg saying this is bad for Europe, bad for Germany, just at a time when the European Union really needs to look to a strong Berlin. That's in their words. But then as the day went on and it became clear that Merz had jumped that hurdle, I was hearing different things from sources. So saying that basically this now looks like more of a hiccup in the view of some European diplomats and less of a political earthquake. But honestly, you could almost hear the sighs of relief echoing around Brussels when Merz cleared that hurdle, because it really was looking like a political crisis that the European Union just doesn't need at this moment in time.
Rosie, do you think that Merz's image took a hit internationally today?
Well, look, it's not a great look for day one. In a sense, that makes day 2 and 3 even more important. But, it depends a bit where you are in the world. While Nina will tell you that those hours must have felt endless in the German parliament, and certainly we were on tenterhooks here in Brussels as well. Depending on where you are in the world, this might have all been resolved by the time you were having breakfast or lunch. And certainly Merz will now be making his trips around the world, trying to project stability and strength, but definitely not an ideal start to his job as Chancellor.
Stability and strength. Nina, talk to me a little bit about the trustworthiness of Friedrich Merz, or, I mean, how trustworthy do Germans think that he is?
And you know my answer. I mean, you're looking at me like, come on, say it. But of course, Friedrich Merz has been accused of lying. You know, electoral fraud was the word that the far-right AfD used. But he definitely said certain things during the election campaign that, as soon as he was elected, said, no, sorry, the political situation around the world has changed and I'm going to have to act differently. And just as an example, during the election campaign, his Conservatives kept saying, no, we need to stick to that infamous debt break. We can't take more money and make more debt than we actually make in terms of our economy, in terms of our GDP. Day one after the federal election, and Friedrich Merz seeks a majority in Parliament to change the rules. So that he now essentially comes across to his critics as somebody who lied, also including from his own party. And that is, I think, something where he really does have to learn political life very, very quickly, Brent, because this is somebody we mustn't forget who's been out of politics for a long time. I mean, as long as Angela Merkel was around and very strong in the Conservatives, there was no room for Friedrich Merz. Merkel gone, Friedrich Merz seized the opportunity and came back. And so he has been out of that political circus, if you will, where you do need to listen carefully to your critics as well, because otherwise they end up throwing you into surprise moments like this.
We've got a question coming in from our viewer, Mol Kaminsky, and Mol is asking, and I think Mol is thinking about the AfD here, what happens when you ignore the second largest number of Democratic votes? And I'm thinking maybe they're thinking about the German election. Is I think, Mol, that's what you're talking about, the AfD. Are they being ignored by what's happening?
Are they being ignored? I don't think they're being ignored. I mean, it is very clear that Friedrich Merz has also said that the firewall stands, that he and his party are not going to collaborate together with extremists, and that, in their eyes, includes the far-right AfD, because they say they accept members within their own ranks that can legally be called fascists, and where intelligence agencies have evidence that these people are working against the Constitution. Now, this was confirmed by the German Domestic Intelligence Service last Friday, right? So the AfD is now challenging that in court. And yes, it is a tremendous challenge for the other parties how to deal with that, because at the same time, the AfD is the strongest opposition party in Bundestag. But the constitution that the Germans gave themselves after the Second World War has rules in place to protect democracy because of our history, because Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists at the time got through to power through democratic means. So at first they only had 12 members of parliament in Reichstag at the time, and then gradually dismantled the democratic system.
Well, I think maybe that's what Mol is trying to get at too. Is there something maybe built into the system that doesn't trust itself? I mean, if you do, when you talk about the malware, what is it, the firewall, and keeping out these far-right parties, maybe that's what he was
yeah, maybe, but
at.
I mean, I don't know. You can phrase it like that, right? But you can also say that system has mechanisms to guarantee its survival.
Yeah, guardrails. That's right. We've got another question now. Our viewer, Carolina Valena. Carolina, good to hear from you. She asks, how can the entire coalition of both CDU, CSU, and SPD, the Social Democrats, deal with far-right groups, especially the AfD party, at the start of the new German Chancellor's term? Yeah, I mean, they don't have to deal with them, or do they have to deal with them? I mean, that's an interesting way to ask it. How do you deal with the main opposition party? We wouldn't be thinking that way if it were the Social Democrats or if it were the Greens, would we?
No, and the far-right AfD is a big challenge, especially to the Conservatives, because the far-right AfD have clearly identified the Conservatives as their main target. They've clearly set the goal of reducing the number of supporters for the Conservatives, and they clearly have their eyes on 2029. So within the Conservatives, you have a very strong debate now. Do we treat them like any other normal party? And these are people like a parliamentary group leader, Jens Spahn, former health minister here in Germany, who says, come on, this is democracy and we need to be strong and we need to tolerate the fact that some people voice opinions that we don't like. And then you have other people also within the Conservatives, like, for example, the former member of parliament, Marco van der Witz, who said, no, we need to make sure that these people get stopped while we still can stop them, because our intelligence agencies have found this evidence and they are trying to push for a ban of the party itself. So that is definitely going to be one of the biggest challenges. All the other parties, I don't think, have such a big issue. They don't feel that there's any question. You just don't work together with them. You tolerate them in Parliament, but you don't give them important positions in committees, for example. So they wouldn't vote in favour of a far-right AfD member holding the committee where intelligence is shared or where defence issues are being discussed. And that is, of course, something where the AfD say you can't ignore us forever. But it is something where ultimately it's not a decision by politicians. Politicians can make this push, right, to ban the AfD. But ultimately it's an independent court that would have to make that decision.
Let me ask, Rosie, in Brussels, are other European Union countries, are they going to be watching to see how this new government deals with the AfD? Because we have to say that Germany is not the only EU country where we have seen a surge in far-right political parties.
No, it's not by a long shot the only country. It can be viewed in some ways as part of a trend across the European Union. I think it comes back to the questions we had both from Carolina and from Moll, which seem to be alluding to this far-right surge that we've seen across the European Union in recent years. While we don't know the exact cause, and Nina has specified this, of those dissenting lawmakers that decided to derail Merz's first attempt, there is what can definitely be said is that there's a trend across the European Union that we see far-right parties gaining more of a vote share, and that is forcing centre-right and centre-left forces that may have very little in common other than their opposition to the far-right to work together. Nina said it's not a love marriage, right? It's a marriage of convenience or a marriage of a must, in a way. And that has been causing a fracturing and a splintering. And what really happens when you have these different forces forced sometimes into coalition together is that there is fertile ground for bust-ups, for dissent, for political parties to disagree on all sorts of different issues. We've seen that play out in France. We've seen France have a handful of different prime ministers over the last year. We've just seen a Portuguese election is coming up. That's because of a government coalition collapsing. In Romania, the governing coalition has also recently just collapsed. So it's not unusual across the European Union in these countries which tend to have parliamentary democracies based on models which are seen as kind of more representative. So a party can get, if it gets a certain share of the vote, it can get into office, unlike in the US where you have these two-party systems, for example. When different number of parties have to work together, it creates more difficulty. And that's part of this trend that we're seeing, that when the far right is in the mix, even more complex for other European parties to get along together.
Rosie, what's the thinking there in Brussels about Friedrich Merz? Do people consider him to be the ideal person to deal with this, with the far right? I mean, how do they see him?
Look, I think people in Brussels are just happy to have a German Chancellor who is at least projecting an image of stability from now on. And, you know, listen, over the last couple of years, the complaint that I have heard over and over again from diplomats, from sources here in Brussels, is that they just don't know where Germany wants to go with its policies. And there's even become a term here in Brussels, they call it the German vote. It's a derogatory term. It means perhaps abstaining on a vote last minute, or pulling out, or that other countries simply don't know where Germany wants to go. I can think of, for example, a vote on whether or not to slap tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and then about the future of the combustion engine car. Because of infighting in the outgoing coalition in Germany, that made it really difficult to make different EU policies. So there's definitely a call for stability, for clarity from Berlin, from here in Brussels, and they'll be happy that there is a Chancellor in office.
And can I add, because Rosie is absolutely right, that Friedrich Merz does seem to have heard these calls, these urgent screams about where is German stability, that famous German stability and you can see that if you look at the list of people he's taken into his cabinet, because for the very first time in decades, the foreign ministry is now also in the hands of the Conservatives. So for the first time in decades, Friedrich Merz's Conservatives hold the Chancellery and the Foreign Ministry. And these two ministries will work very closely together, trying to send the same message to Germany's allies. So that is clearly a lesson that Friedrich Merz himself has drawn from this criticism that he's also been aware of. And he's made it clear that, you know, especially internationally, Germany needs to become this beacon of stability again. Then also another point of evidence for this theory that Friedrich Merz has really heard this call from Brussels and other allies is that he kept Boris Pistorius from the Social Democrats in power as Germany's defence minister. Now, the defence ministry is an important ministry these days in Germany. It wasn't always the case, right? But now it is, and Boris Pistorius is a popular person, where even the Conservatives say, hang on, this is somebody who could be in our party, so why would we challenge the Social Democrats? You know, we're leaving that position in the hands of somebody where we know he can get things done, and he's a pragmatist from the Social Democrats. So internationally, I think Friedrich Merz really has tried to convey to allies that sense, OK, you can trust us. Having said that, all the pledges that he's going to make to international allies from now on will still, if they require the approval of Parliament, be questionable, to say the least, because today showed that Friedrich Merz, even though he has a very narrow majority, but he has a majority in Parliament, his own people may want to challenge some of his ideas.
So in other words, they're going to look at Chancellor Merz and they're going to say you're only as good as what the Parliament approves.
Absolutely.
Right?
You may be the Chancellor, but you know, we've got important things to say here as well.
So what does this mean then for the big issues? Because I mean, the world looks at immigration and migration. Obviously, the defense spending here, and there's the war in Ukraine. Kind of talk us through the big issues that Chancellor Merz is going to have to deal with immediately.
Immediately, on day one, he promised harsher immigration policies. And on day one, they said, we are going to work towards this, what they called the migration turnaround. Migrationswende. So he said, you know, we've been letting in way too many people. We have no control of who stays here and who has to leave. And we can't get rid of some of the people who then end up becoming security threats. So on day one, also his Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, he said, all right, we'll have much tighter border controls and we'll also see pushbacks. Now, Rosie will confirm, I think, that it's not going to be quite so easy because there are EU rules and this government has pledged to adhere to international rules. That includes EU rules, so all the neighbours essentially have to agree to take back some of the people that Germany doesn't want. So that is going to be difficult. Germany is surrounded by 9 countries, so 9 neighbours would have to say, yeah, OK, we'll take them back. But anyway, what we will definitely see is more border controls.
We've got a comment coming in here. Maybe we can pull that up too. But it's sticking with the AFD. I think our viewers, they're really concerned about what's going to happen with the AFD. This is a comment from Porosimus Knox, who writes that the AFD have been tremendously successful latching on to migration and transgenderism and would simply move on. The only way to combat the rise is to actually stabilize the geopolitical climate.
Ooh,
you say to that, yeah. I mean, it's a broader thing, but in other words, deal with them instead of ignoring them, I think is what this viewer is saying, right? And that's not what we hear in Berlin, though, is it?
Well, it is. You do hear that, you know, from some people who are still opposing a ban, even though Germany's intelligence agencies have said, look, this is a right-wing extremist movement. It is anti-constitutional. Some politicians are still saying, even if we ban the party, you're not going to get rid of their voters. And the idea is that voters want to see discussed in the public sphere. So you have to come up with better ideas of how to tackle the problems that people are faced with or that they feel threatened by, or, you know, content rather than symbolism is, I think, something that the Conservatives are saying. But, of course, you also have to keep in mind that the far-right AfD are being supported by the MAGA movement in the US, for example. They are being supported, some of their members, you know, by Russia, by China. There have been cases, and maybe Rosie can talk about that a bit more, you know, where people have proof that there are links So this is a party where it's not just... the debate has to be wider, I think. That there are ties to other movements that have different things in their minds.
I think people, though, with this comment, too, points to the fact that people are watching to see what Germany does. And I'm thinking now with the new Chancellor, we don't know if he's going to meet with President Trump in the U.S., if that's a visit has been planned. But we do know that the MAGA people, as well as the White House, they have been a vocal supporter of the AfD. So how does the new Chancellor, how does he, address that situation, let's say, if he is sitting in the Oval Office?
Yeah, we had a test run, didn't we, during the Munich Security Conference, right? When J.D. Vance took to the stage and essentially accused Germany, but also other European countries, of working against democracy by ignoring the will of the people. And that was criticised very, very severely here by politicians from the Social Democrats, but also from the Conservatives, people who are saying, look, this is not the kind of way that you talk to allies. And it is unheard of that an ally like the United States meddles with our internal affairs during an election campaign, pushing and giving a lot of reach and a lot of visibility to an opposition party. So that did cause a bit of a crisis here, to say the least, but it was an important moment, I think, also for Friedrich Merz to think about and reflect how to approach that relationship with the United States.
But as it stands tonight, we don't know that there isn't a planned meeting of the new Chancellor with the U.S. President,
Not
right?
yet.
Not yet, not yet. Let me go over to Rosie, because Rosie, we know that tomorrow the new Chancellor is scheduled to meet with the French President, right?
Absolutely. We are expecting Friedrich Merz to show up in Paris. The French President Emmanuel Macron, now Friedrich Merz's counterpart officially, will roll out the carpet, we expect, at the Élysée Palace. And I think there what will be on the agenda is lots of talk of reinvigorating and restoring what's often called in Brussels the Franco-German engine. These are the two political heavyweights of the European Union, France and Germany, Merz and Macron. And for the last few years, months especially, given that Scholz, the former Chancellor, was seen so much as a lame duck Chancellor, there's been a sense of Germany being a bit MIA at European policy making. And French President Emmanuel Macron has already taken to social media to say now it's up to us, addressing Friedrich Merz, to reinvigorate this Franco-German engine. They are Europe's power couple, and they'll be trying to project that image of togetherness.
Rosie, I mean, power couple, that's a good way to describe what maybe they haven't been, because the former Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he and Macron, they weren't known for having the best chemistry, right?
No, definitely not. And I think, especially what we've seen in the last few months, is Emmanuel Macron has used the last few months to push himself to the front when it comes to European foreign policy. Some would say that's because he wants to be out in front. Some would say it's because he had to, because Germany wasn't really there. We've seen France and, of course, the UK, which is not a member of the European Union, but is part of Europe, especially since Trump took office in the United States, trying to charge ahead, make sure that Europe gets a seat at the table when it comes to things like the future of Russia's war in Ukraine, which, of course, is the future of the security of this continent. And there we've seen, Macron powering ahead there, taking on the helm. What will be interesting to see moving forward is if he's willing to step aside and make some space for Mr. Merz. If, according to what he's saying on the record, that should be the way ahead. That will make the whole of Europe stronger. But certainly Macron's been having a bit of a diplomatic moment in the sun for the last few months. So let's see what the chemistry is like between those two leaders on Wednesday.
It would be in Macron and Merz's interest to try to find that chemistry, right? Because in a post-Brexit Europe, there's been a lot of talk about the center of gravity in the European Union shifting east. I'm thinking particularly of countries like Poland. And maybe behind closed doors, you could hear officials in Paris and here in Brussels saying that they don't want that to happen. I mean, how do you see that?
Yeah, look, Germany is still the biggest economy in the European Union. It's still seen as absolutely crucial for everything when it comes to Europe's future. But what's definitely true is that we have seen a surge in the soft power of Poland, Germany's neighbour. And by the way, we're expecting Merz to head to Poland after he heads to Paris. So clearly also very high on his agenda. In some ways, that Polish surge has been so much linked to the war raging across its border in Ukraine. Poland shares a border with Ukraine, and it's been absolutely out in front when it comes to demanding tougher action against Russia and more support for Kiev. Merz has talked a big game on that so far in terms of continuing Ukraine support, and I think you can pretty much bet that's going to be what he will be talking about with his Polish counterpart in Warsaw. That's something which also I think the rest of the European countries will be waiting to see if Merz makes good on that. It's such a crucial time for Ukraine, especially with all the uncertainty generated by what President Trump wants or does not want to do moving forward.
Yeah. Nina, I have to ask you, there was this image that struck me today, and that was Angela Merkel was sitting up in the gallery today in the German parliament watching all of this happen. And I think viewers around the world, if they've followed Germany and politics at all, they'll know that Angela Merkel, many would say, took away the power that Friedrich Merz had 20-something years ago, right? And so talk to me about that image of her sitting there watching him lose a first round of vote and then having to do a second round to become chancellor.
Well, there was no glee or anything, you know, but these two are probably, they're going to go down in history in post-war Germany in the 20th century and the early 2000s as the arch rivals within the same party. So Friedrich Merz wanted to get all the posts that she had, and she essentially managed to push him aside and become Chancellor and be the Chancellor for 16 years. So I said it right at the beginning. He then realised, OK, as long as she's there, there's no room for me. And then she left. She stepped down voluntarily, right? We all remember that. And made way. And essentially the Conservatives were looking for a new leader, and they were looking for a new definition of what modern-day Conservative actually means, and Friedrich Merz was there. He had a lot of experience. He is very well connected, and he then took over and helped the party get their own identity back. Now, to see her there was one of a couple of moments, Brent, where I thought today really showed that German democracy is strong. Might sound pathetic, and we'll probably get a lot of comments saying, whatever, we'll read through them afterwards.
She was sitting up in the gallery as a regular citizen,
there,
right?
Yeah. She wasn't sneering, she wasn't doing anything. You know, it was a sign of respect. And in the same way, people who criticised Merz heavily during the election campaign came to him and shook his hands and wished him good luck, including the Left Party, where Friedrich Merz's own Conservatives, up until today, had a rule in their own rule book where they said, we're not going to collaborate with the far-right AfD, but we're also not going to collaborate with the far-left party unless we need them to change the rules so that I can be voted in today in the second round, because that is not a rule that we had up until today. And the Left Party's votes were absolutely crucial for this to happen today, and everything else would have been a massive defeat. So Friedrich Merz now owes the Left Party. And so we saw lots of these little moments. Even the far-right AfD party's members came and congratulated Friedrich Merz. So, you know, we always speak about polarisation, and I think there is a trend towards polarisation, but people shouldn't forget that today German democracy, you know, did have a hiccup, like Rosie said, and then things went on. And we never not Never did we not have a chancellor at any minute today. Olaf Scholz remained in office until Friedrich Merz took over. I'm not trying to play this down, but I do want to put this into perspective because we are getting used to more and more intense shouting scenes, you know, all across the world. And today, Angela Merkel showed up for Friedrich Merz. The left party shake his hands. He shakes hands with the far-right AfD, and then everybody goes home.
So, yeah, civilized behavior. People acting with decency.
Almost boring.
Yeah, right.
Good old boring.
But it becomes news because we haven't seen it in such a long time, it seems like. You know, since I mentioned Angela Merkel, let me talk about another political figure who may or may not be in Friedrich Merz's future, and that is Alice Weidel. She's the head of the AfD. Her supporters say that she will be the next chancellor. How is that dynamic going to play out moving forward, do you think?
We interviewed Alice Weidel last summer for our big documentary, and I really recommend that to everybody who's following this now, because people, if you're watching this, then you're interested in German politics. So do look that up, Alice Weidel and the AfD's foreign policy ideas. So just looking at what they say themselves, where they want to go. Only interviews with AfD people or experts who are outside of Germany, so, you know, they can't take part in our elections here, so they're not biased. So really highly recommendable there. And Alice Weidel said, I am working towards becoming Germany's Chancellor in 2029. And so far, you know, she's pushing where she needs to push, but she's also making very, very sure that she's not stepping ahead, that she she's, you know, making sure that she's keeping right-wing extremist figures out of the picture. During the federal election campaign, for example, we didn't really see a lot of Björn Höcke from the state of Thuringia at all, and that is also partly due to Alice Weidel's leadership. Today, after the first round, our colleague Michaela Küfner interviewed her, and of course she then said Friedrich Merz is characterless and he has to step down, he has to make way, we need fresh elections. But like I say, after the second round, he gets elected and they shake his hand.
My producer is asking me about the new cabinet. What should we mention about the new cabinet for our viewers? Any figures there, people that noteworthy that you think that really will make a difference?
I think there are two ways of approaching this. One is Friedrich Merz has surprised a lot of people from within his own party by getting a lot of external people in. So even, you know, political journalists in Berlin are still getting used to some of the faces and the names because he has taken in as ministers some people who used to run big companies. And that is really not something that happens a lot. You know, usually... That's right. You have to appoint people who have shown loyalty, etc. But the other thing is also that he's got a mix of very, very young women and men in there, and Boris Pistorius is the only person who's staying on in the new cabinet.
Yeah, what about gender parity, or when you talk about the number of women and men in the cabinet, what strikes you there? Is it fairly balanced? When I look at it, it doesn't look balanced, but...
The SPD, if I'm not mistaken, gave 4 positions of 7 that they had to women. 3 of them are under 40.
Under 40?
Under 40. One of them has a migration background, as we call it here. So she's going to be the new Minister for Development Affairs. And the Conservatives have a big majority of older men, shall we say. So that is not a big surprise, knowing Friedrich Merz. I mean, he's a granddad himself, you know. He's not... Yeah, he wasn't never going to appoint a cabinet where he was going to look at the quota as such. You say
he's a granddad. He's 69 years old. And is it, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't he the oldest person to become chancellor? Isn't that right?
Got me on the spot. Could be true. Yeah.
Rosie, do you know that by any chance? Is 69 is the oldest? I think it is. It's the oldest person to become chancellor. I mean, society
we
here...
trust you on it. Well, I can tell you when
Yeah?
he was young, he became a member of the European Parliament here in Brussels. So in his earlier life, you can see very nice pictures of a fresh-faced Friedrich Merz here, casting his ballot here in Brussels. So that's also another reason why I think many will welcome him here. He's felt as a bit of an EU policy wonk. Even President Ursula von der Leyen, who runs the European Commission, that's that building behind me, she has said an expert on Europe is now in the Chancellery.
And since we're talking about age, Rosie, let me ask you, the population, the demographic developments here in Europe, we're seeing the median age skewing older and older. Is that something, too, that in Brussels people see as becoming more and more of a political issue that will have to be addressed, particularly by, Europe's leading country?
Well, look, it depends how you want to approach that. Certainly, from something Merz has talked a lot about is trying to avoid deindustrialization. That's something which you might see as appealing to older voters that might have memories of industrial heartlands in Germany. He's talked about trying to slash red tape. But if you want to talk about it from a perspective that might be seen as more controversial in Merz's political circle, well, let's talk about migration again, because, of course, if you want to attract a lot of young people to a country in terms of trying to get talent, skills, think about artificial intelligence and the rush to have a more technologically advanced country, well, then you might need to talk about migration. And that's, of course, a very thorny issue. Merz has pledged to, in a speech to his European counterparts from his centre-right political faction, he talked about drastically reducing migration, although he was in that case particularly talking about irregular migration, it must be said. But what really struck me is he said, look, laws are there, but laws can be changed if they have to be. And that alludes to something that Nina mentioned, which is that Merz may end up being on a bit of a collision course with Brussels because there are EU laws on migration in terms of borders being open, in terms of accepting people who wish to claim asylum, at least to have their cases be heard and their claims reviewed. That could be a potential area of disagreement for Merz and some EU counterparts.
But can I just add, everything, true that Rosie said, and Merz has appointed a person to run a newly founded ministry for digitalisation and state modernisation. So sounds like a very German way of cutting bureaucracy by creating another bureaucratic entity. But, he's got a manager in and he is going to try and put a very strong focus on how to modernise this country because, of course, we're lagging behind.
Yeah, when you live here, you know what you're talking about with bureaucracy. My producer just tells me, by the way, that Konrad Adenauer, who was the first post-war German chancellor, he was 73 when he was elected. So we can't give the...
for producers.
That's right. We can't give the title
Merz is a spring chicken.
to Friedrich Merz tonight. Listen, these are the last 2 minutes of Ask DW. Let me ask you, Nina, the importance that this new government hold for 4 years. In our lifetimes, can I say tonight that it's probably, there's never been a time when the government had to hold where it's been as important as it is right now?
Yes, and they're doomed to succeed, right? I mean, they have to succeed, and they know it. And they know that they don't have an alternative because then they can't call fresh elections if they don't want to lose even more votes. First, they do have to deliver. They have to change a couple of things. They have to stop the infighting that we saw in the outgoing government. And if they want to stop the AfD from scoring even higher in the next round, then they really need to act.
Rosie, I've got 20 seconds. Let me ask you, are all bets in Brussels on this government holding 4 years?
Well, that's certainly the hope here. They want more predictability from Germany, and Friedrich Merz has sent a message to Europe, you can count on us. They will be waiting to see if that is really the case, and particularly what his biggest foreign policy priorities are going to be moving forward.
All right. Well, listen, we are at the end of Ask DW. I want to thank both Rosie, you in Brussels, and Nina Haase here at the big table with me. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. We will be back the next time on Ask DW. I will be back. Look at the clock. At the top of the hour with more world news, I hope you can join us then.